The wind carried a strange kind of silence through Highgate Cemetery that morning, one not born from stillness but from absence. The kind of silence that fills a space where something should be, but isn't. Julian Blackwood stepped out of his Aston Martin and into the cold breath of October, his leather soles touching the ground with reverent precision. The moment his foot hit the gravel, he felt it, the weight of memory pressing down, the tightening in his chest that came every year on this date. 5 years. It never got easier. Julian was the kind of man who measured time in fiscal quarters and market swings. He built his empire from silence and discipline, from sacrifice and data. The world knew him as a man who didn't flinch. But grief was immune to logic. And today, grief had claws. Clutching a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, he moved down the familiar pathway through a landscape etched with marble names and forgotten stories. The trees were nearly bare, their golden leaves scattered across the graves like remnants of old prayers. No one knew about this ritual. No one needed to. This place belonged to his heart, not his headlines. He hadn't cried in 3 years. Not since the last time he tried to speak her name out loud. Isabelle. It hit him differently today. He couldn't explain why. As he rounded the final turn toward her grave, something stopped him cold. A small figure sat huddled at the foot of her headstone, motionless, like a statue left behind by the wind. A boy. Tiny against the vastness of the cemetery, no more than 6 or 7, dressed in a jacket far too thin for the bite in the air. His knees were pulled to his chest, arms wrapped tightly around them, as if trying to hold himself together. Julian blinked. For a moment, he thought the cold had tricked his mind, that this was some bizarre illusion. But the boy was real. Real and heartbreakingly alone. He approached with measured steps, unsure whether to speak or wait. The boy didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. "Hey," Julian said, voice steady but soft. "Are you lost?" The boy turned slowly, lifting his head. And that's when it happened. That moment, impossible, shattering, irreversible. The boy's eyes. Soft brown, flecked with gold. Familiar in a way that broke something inside Julian. He had seen those eyes before, watched them crinkle with laughter over dinner, watched them widen in surprise when he brought flowers home for no reason. Isabelle's eyes. There was no mistaking it. It was like looking into a ghost. No, not a ghost. Something more haunting. "I came to see my mom," the boy said. Julian's breath hitched. His world, so carefully constructed from stone and steel, suddenly cracked under the pressure of that one sentence. "What did you say?" he asked, though his voice barely came out. The boy pointed to the grave. "Isabelle Blackwood. That's my mom." The earth tilted. For the first time in years, Julian felt like he might collapse. He dropped to a knee, staring at the name etched in marble. His wife's name. His world. And next to it, a boy with her eyes claiming her as his mother. This wasn't possible. It wasn't real. Isabelle never had children. They had spoken about it once, briefly, before her accident, and it always ended with the same excuse: later, when things slowed down. Later never came. "I think you're mistaken," Julian said carefully, though his voice betrayed him. The boy shook his head. "Miss Harrington says she left me at the home when I was a baby. But she came to see me sometimes. She brought me books. She wore a red scarf. She said I was special." Julian felt the world narrowing, folding inward like a collapsing star. He could hardly breathe. "What's your name?" he asked, afraid of the answer. "Eli," the boy replied. "Eli Crane." Julian's hands trembled. Crane. The name barely registered. All that mattered was the look in Eli's eyes. Not just the color. The shape. The way they softened when he spoke about her. And there was something else, a quiet kind of sorrow. Too deep for someone so small. You said, she came to visit you. The boy nodded. Before she stopped. Miss Harrington said she went to heaven. I asked if it was my fault. She said no. Julian's heart broke clean in two. This child had been grieving his wife in silence, all alone. Grieving a woman Julian thought he had known completely. And yet, this boy sat here with a history Julian had never heard, a bond he had never seen. If Isabelle had loved this child, protected him, visited him, why had she kept him a secret? More terrifying still, what if she hadn't? What if she had tried to tell him, and he'd been too distracted, too consumed by work and ambition to hear it? He studied Eli again. The resemblance was more than emotional projection. It was bone deep. The shape of his chin. The faint dimple when he spoke. Even the way he sat, with his head slightly tilted to one side, just like Isabelle used to do when reading. I didn't know, Julian whispered. Eli didn't respond. Julian stared at the grave, his thoughts unraveling. His entire life was built on knowing everything, seeing around every corner, predicting the next move before others had even realized the game had begun. And yet here he was, brought to his knees by a child with nothing but a name and a memory. Who was Isabelle Blackwood, really? Who had she been when he wasn't looking? What had she sacrificed to protect this boy? And what had he missed because he was too afraid to ask the questions that mattered? The truth no longer cared for the narrative Julian had told himself for years. He wasn't in control. Not here. He turned back to Eli. Where do you live? At the home. In East London. Julian stood. The wind cut through his coat. Eli stood, too, brushing leaves from his pants. You shouldn't be out here alone, Julian said. I come every year, Eli replied. On this day. I always will. Julian swallowed hard. Come with me. We'll get you somewhere warm. Eli hesitated. Are you a stranger? Yes, Julian admitted. But maybe not for long. The boy looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, cautiously, took his hand. It was small. Cold. But steady. Julian didn't know where this would lead. He didn't know if he could ever unravel the lies, the silence, the mystery that now threatened to rewrite his past and define his future. But he did know this, nothing would ever be the same. And as they walked away from the grave together, Julian understood one devastating, magnificent truth. His story with Isabelle hadn't ended at her grave. It had only just begun. The sky over London was grey with a heavy stillness, as if even the clouds had paused to consider what had just happened. Julian drove with one hand steady on the wheel, his mind anything but. Eli sat quietly in the passenger seat of the Aston Martin, too small for the leather bucket seat, too young for the shadows he carried. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was unfamiliar. An unspoken pact had formed between them, one rooted in grief, mystery, and a single, shattering truth: Isabelle had lived another life that Julian had never seen. They stopped at a corner cafe in Camden, a warm place with fogged-up windows and the smell of espresso lingering in the air. Julian ordered hot chocolate for Eli, black coffee for himself. As they sat at a small table by the window, the rain began to tap against the glass in a soft, syncopated rhythm. Julian watched Eli hold the cup with both hands, blowing into the steam. He looked like any child in the world, except for the fact that he wasn't, not to Julian. Not anymore. Did she ever tell you anything? Julian asked, his voice low. Eli shook his head. Not much. She just said she couldn't keep me. But she never stopped loving me. The words hit Julian harder than he expected. Could Isabelle have carried this guilt all those years? Had she watched him build a world of glass and steel while hiding an ache that never left her? He paid the bill and led Eli out into the street, rain softening to a drizzle. He didn't want to bring the boy back to that shelter just yet. He wasn't ready to let go, not until he had answers. Not until the unbearable uncertainty settled. Back at his penthouse in Canary Wharf, Julian made a quiet decision: he would find out everything. He placed a call to his chief of security and personal investigator, Darren Shaw, a former intelligence officer whose calm voice made things sound simple even when they were anything but. "I need you to dig into something," Julian said, pacing the marble floor of his study. "A woman named Isabelle Blackwood. 5 years dead. And a boy named Eli. I want every connection, every record, every unexplained absence, every possible link." Shaw didn't ask questions. He never did. Julian turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline glittered like a promise he no longer believed in. In the reflection, he saw Eli walking slowly through the living room, studying the space. Everything was cold, minimalist, organized. It wasn't built for a child. It wasn't built for anyone, really. It had been a shrine to productivity, a fortress to keep emotion out. Now, that emotion stood barefoot on his rug, looking at a photo of Isabelle on the mantel. "She was really pretty," Eli said. Julian didn't respond. He didn't trust his voice. The next morning, Shaw called. "I found her," he said. "Rather, I found where she used to go." He explained that before her death, Isabelle had been volunteering at a small shelter in East London. Low profile. Underfunded. Run by a woman named Margaret Harrington. Julian was there within the hour. The shelter sat between two crumbling tenement buildings. It looked tired but not broken, the way people do when they've spent their lives giving more than they receive. Inside, it smelled of old books and disinfectant. A faded mural of sunflowers covered one wall. Children's voices echoed in the background. Margaret Harrington was older than Julian expected, but her presence was firm, almost maternal. When he introduced himself, her eyes widened slightly. "So, you've finally come." Julian blinked. "You knew about me?" She nodded. "Isabelle told me everything. Not all at once. But over time. She said if anything ever happened to her, she hoped you'd come." He felt the room tilt again. Why didn't she ever tell me? Why keep him a secret? Mrs. Harrington folded her hands. "Because she was afraid. Not of you, exactly. But of what knowing would do to you. She said you lived in a world of precision. And Eli. Eli was something messy. Unpredictable. She didn't want to risk losing both of you." Julian sat down heavily in a chair across from her. "That's not a decision she had the right to make." "No," she agreed. "But it was the only one she could." She reached into a drawer and handed him a weathered leather journal. "She wrote everything here. For him, I think. Maybe for you too." Julian took it with reverent hands. It still smelled faintly of her perfume. He returned home, journal in hand, and locked himself in his study. For hours, he read. Page after page revealed a woman he thought he had known. Isabelle's handwriting wavered between strength and sorrow. She wrote about Eli's birth, her decision to leave him at the shelter after fleeing a painful situation she never named. About meeting Julian shortly after. About the nights she stood outside the penthouse wondering if she should tell him. About the guilt. The hope. The fear that he wouldn't love her the same. She had wanted to come clean. She had planned to, after the New York merger. But then the accident happened. One rainy night. A taxi. A blur. And everything stopped. Julian felt the walls he'd built begin to collapse. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost the chance to know the full truth of who she was. He thought about all the times she had gone quiet during conversations about children. About the moment she cried while watching a father and daughter in a park. He had assumed it was grief from not having children. Now he saw the deeper truth: she had already lost one. That evening, Julian sat across from Eli at the dinner table. He had managed to cobble together something edible, grilled cheese and soup. Eli ate quietly, but not tensely. Slowly, he was beginning to relax around Julian, though his eyes still scanned the room as if waiting for the moment this fragile piece would vanish. After dinner, they sat together on the couch. Julian handed Eli the journal. "It's your mother's. She wrote it for you." Eli held it like it was made of glass. He didn't open it. Just held it. "Was she scared?" he asked. Julian didn't answer right away. "She was brave," he finally said. "But sometimes, brave people are scared too." Eli nodded. That night, he fell asleep curled up under a blanket with the journal on his chest. Julian watched him and realized that for all his accomplishments, all his wealth, he had never built anything as important as this fragile, impossible connection. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And that, for the first time in years, gave him something close to hope. Julian had always known how to control the chaos. That was his gift. When markets crashed or competitors circled like wolves, he stayed unshaken. He had built his company from a single algorithm into an empire of artificial intelligence that touched lives across continents. He could predict human behavior better than most humans could understand themselves. Yet, no logic, no model, no meticulously trained neural network could have prepared him for the boy now living in his penthouse. Eli had been in his home for only a few days, but already, everything felt different. The silence that once defined Julian's sanctuary was now punctuated by soft footsteps, curious questions, the quiet hum of cartoons at breakfast, and the smell of peanut butter instead of imported espresso. His home, a cathedral to efficiency, now bore signs of a life lived imperfectly but with wonder. Crumbs on the countertop. A spaceship drawing on the fridge. A half-eaten apple on the bookshelf. And at the center of it all, Eli. Julian found himself watching the boy more than he spoke. Not out of suspicion, but out of a strange, almost sacred awe. There was something in the way Eli looked at the world, with cautious optimism, as if he knew it could hurt him but still hoped it wouldn't. And every so often, Julian would catch the boy staring back at him with the same quiet intensity. Neither of them seemed sure what this new proximity meant. But neither had turned away. The results arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The envelope sat on Julian's desk, untouched for nearly 2 hours. He paced the room, poured himself a drink, let the scotch burn down his throat, and stared at the envelope like it might explode if opened. Finally, he sat, slid his finger beneath the seal, and unfolded the pages. Eli was not his biological son. Julian didn't blink. He had known this was a possibility. But seeing it confirmed in ink did something to him. It didn't hurt in the way he'd expected, not like rejection. It hurt like something more subtle, more insidious, loss of an imagined future that had already begun to root itself in his chest. The report included a name. Richard Crane. Julian froze. Richard Crane was more than a name. He was a force. A man carved from ice and ambition, whose ruthless acquisition strategies had left dozens of companies in ruins. Julian had faced him in boardrooms and negotiations over the years and had always walked away with the bitter taste of mistrust. They were two sides of the same coin, except Richard had long ago given up any pretense of humanity in the pursuit of power. If Isabelle had once crossed paths with him, and if that encounter had resulted in Eli, the implications were staggering. Julian walked to the window and stared out at the city, glowing beneath clouds heavy with rain. He thought of Isabelle, of the pain in her journal, the cautious joy in her entries about Eli. Had she known? Had she suspected? And if she had, why had she kept it secret? Perhaps because she feared what Richard would do if he found out. Perhaps because Julian, for all his success, had always been hard to reach when it came to things that couldn't be solved with strategy. Eli was in the library, his small fingers tracing the spines of Julian's collection of rare science fiction novels. He had fallen in love with the idea of space exploration and asked 100 questions a day about planets and propulsion and gravity. Julian, to his own surprise, had begun to enjoy answering them. They were building something, even if neither dared name it. That evening, Julian took Eli to the Natural History Museum. The boy's face lit up as they walked through the halls, eyes wide with wonder at dinosaur skeletons and meteorites and fossils that whispered stories from 1,000,000 years ago. "Do you think we could ever live on Mars?" Eli asked as they stood beneath the enormous replica of a blue whale suspended from the ceiling. "Maybe," Julian replied. "But we'd need a lot of patience. And bravery." Eli grinned. "I think I'd like to try." They stopped for ice cream on the way back. Julian watched as Eli ate with the kind of delight adults forget they're allowed to feel. He wanted to protect that innocence. To keep it safe from the harshness of the world. Especially now. When they returned home, Julian tucked Eli into bed, something he never imagined himself doing even a week ago. As he turned to leave the room, Eli's voice stopped him. "Jules." It was the nickname he'd started using, quietly at first, as if testing the boundary between them. "Yes. Are you gonna keep me?" Julian felt the word strike something deep inside him. He walked back to the bed, sat on the edge, and looked the boy in the eyes. "I don't know everything yet," he said honestly. "But I know I want you safe. And I know I care about you. A lot." Eli didn't speak. He simply nodded and pulled the blanket up to his chin. Julian stayed until the boy fell asleep. Later, he sat alone in his study, staring at the name on the DNA report. Richard Crane. The man would find out. Men like Crane always did. And when he did, he wouldn't see Eli as a child, he'd see him as an opportunity. An extension of legacy. A symbol to control. Julian couldn't let that happen. He picked up his phone and called Darren Shaw. "I need you to start preparing for a legal wall. Custody, guardianship, adoption, whatever applies. If Richard Crane finds out, I need to be ahead of him." "Understood," Shaw replied. "Should I inform Crane?" "Not yet. Not unless we absolutely have to." When he hung up, Julian returned to the library. Eli's drawing of a spaceship was still on the table. It was clumsy, lopsided, a child's vision of the stars. And next to it, in big, uncertain letters, the name of the ship, the Isabelle. Julian swallowed hard. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't expected it. But it was here. And no part of him wanted to let it go. Julian had always known that peace was fragile. He had lived most of his life under the illusion that control was synonymous with safety, that if he could just keep all variables accounted for, all risks anticipated, then the world would bend to his design. But the presence of Eli in his life had shattered that notion. With a single child's hand placed trustingly in his, Julian had entered a realm of chaos he couldn't analyze, only feel. He hadn't told Eli about Richard Crane. Not yet. There was still a window of quiet. Still time to make choices before someone else made them for him. But time, as always, moved faster when you feared what waited at the end of it. The inevitable came not with a whisper, but with the unmistakable sound of power rearing its head. Julian was in a quarterly board meeting when his assistant stepped into the room, her face pale and tight. "He's here," she said. "Richard Crane." Julian's pen stopped mid-stroke. The room seemed to freeze. He stood, adjusted his cuffs with automatic precision, and walked out without a word. He found Richard waiting in the lobby of Blackwood Industries, impeccably dressed in slate gray, his expression sharp and unreadable. His presence, like always, was a contradiction, cold, yet burning with intention. "Julian," he said, as if they were old friends meeting for coffee. "I assume this isn't a courtesy visit." Richard's mouth twitched. "Let's speak somewhere private." They walked to a glass-walled conference room on the top floor, overlooking the Thames. The door shut with a soft finality. I take it you've seen the test, Richard said, dropping into a leather chair. Julian remained standing. You've been digging. I'm always digging. You know that. Julian's jaw tightened. Why now? Because I received an anonymous tip 2 days ago. A boy. A name. A connection to Isabelle. I followed the trail, and lo and behold, your security team left just enough breadcrumbs to confirm what I already suspected. Julian said nothing. Richard leaned forward, folding his hands together. Is he mine? Julian gave a slight nod. Biologically, yes. And legally? Not yet. Richard exhaled, as if the truth had taken something out of him. But Julian knew better than to assume anything resembling emotion lived behind that exterior. Richard was a tactician. If he showed anything, it was because he wanted to. And that made him dangerous. I want to meet him, Richard said. He's not ready. Richard raised an eyebrow. Or you're not ready to let him go. Julian stepped closer. He's not a deal. He's not an asset. He's a boy. Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. And yet you've positioned yourself as his sole protector, as if you've already won custody of something that doesn't belong to you. Julian's voice remained calm, but his chest burned. He's not a possession. He's someone I care about deeply. I won't let you treat him like a strategic investment. Richard stood. Then let him decide. Julian turned to the window, staring out at the river slicing through the heart of the city. If you force his hand, he'll never trust you. And if you use your power to manipulate the situation, press through courts, pressure the system, I'll fight you every step of the way. Richard joined him at the glass. You always did like a fight. This one's different. Richard studied Julian for a moment longer, then nodded slightly. I'm not a monster, Julian. I won't take him by force. But I will introduce myself. I'll let him know who I am. After that, what happens is up to him. Julian didn't respond. He didn't have to. Richard left without another word. The room stayed quiet long after he was gone. Julian drove home that evening slower than usual. The city pulsed around him with the energy of people trying to get somewhere faster than they needed to. But he wasn't rushing. He was preparing. Preparing to tell Eli something that would shake his already uncertain world. He found the boy sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by open books and scattered Lego pieces. A makeshift rocket ship sat half-built in front of him. When Julian stepped inside, Eli looked up, his eyes expectant. Julian sat down beside him. There's something I need to tell you, he said. And I want you to hear it from me, not anyone else. Eli's hand stilled. You remember when we talked about your mom, about the things she had to carry alone? Eli nodded. Well, part of that was a name. A man she once knew. Someone who, may not have been a good fit for her life, but someone who is connected to yours. Eli's gaze sharpened. His name is Richard Crane, Julian said. He's your biological father. Silence. Eli didn't speak. Didn't move. Julian kept going. He found out. He wants to meet you. But I told him it would be your choice. Only yours. Eli sat back slowly, his expression unreadable. Did my mom know? He asked quietly. Julian hesitated. She suspected. But she didn't tell him. She didn't want him to take you. She thought it was safer this way. Eli nodded, but it was a small, mechanical motion. And what do you want? Julian looked him directly in the eyes. I want you to be safe. I want you to feel loved. And if that means standing beside you when you meet him, I will. And if that means keeping him away, I will do that too. The next morning, Eli was quieter than usual. At breakfast, he pushed scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. After schoolwork, he retreated to his room and read for hours. Julian gave him space. Some decisions needed silence. That weekend, Julian took Eli away, to the Lake District. Just the two of them. No lawyers. No looming decisions. No legacy battles. The countryside was painted in shades of gold and deep green, and the air was cleaner than either of them had breathed in weeks. They walked for hours along winding paths, pausing by lakes that stretched into mist and horizon. One night, Julian brought paper and pens to the cabin porch. "Want to make wishes?" he asked. Eli looked confused. "Like birthday wishes?" "Kind of," Julian said. "But with paper boats. You write what you want. Then we send them into the lake." Eli wrote in silence. So did Julian. They lit candles, placed the slips of paper inside their makeshift boats, and set them adrift under a sky full of stars. Julian's boat floated into the darkness, carrying a single line, "Let him know love that never walks away." Back at the cabin, Eli finally asked, "If he takes me, would you still visit me?" Julian turned to him, voice calm but firm. "No one can take you. Not unless you let them. But if you ever chose to go, I would never disappear. You'd never be alone." Eli didn't answer, but he reached out and took Julian's hand. And in that single, quiet gesture, Julian felt something stronger than fear, stronger than bloodlines, stronger than even biology. He felt chosen. He didn't know how long this calm would last. Richard Crane was not a man who gave up easily. But for now, there was peace in the uncertainty. And in Julian's heart, a fire burned, not of defense, but of promise. He would protect this child. Not because he had to. But because he couldn't imagine doing anything else. The city shimmered beneath the soft veil of dusk, its skyline reflecting in the windows of Julian's penthouse like a world he no longer quite recognized. It had been just over a month since Eli entered his life, and everything he thought he knew about identity, legacy, and love had been quietly rewritten. Julian sat at the dining table, fingertips resting against a warm mug of tea, staring across at the boy who had upended everything, and in doing so, revealed what truly mattered. Eli was sketching again, hunched over the notebook Julian had bought him in the Lake District. Rockets, stars, bits of handwritten facts about Mars and distant galaxies dotted the pages. But in the center of it all was a drawing of a tall man holding hands with a small boy beneath a sky full of constellations. No names. No labels. But the message was loud enough to ring in Julian's chest like a bell. Then the knock came. Julian opened the door to find Richard Crane waiting, dressed in charcoal gray, expression subdued. He didn't ask to come in. He simply nodded, acknowledging the tension in the space they now shared. "I appreciate you letting me meet him," Richard said quietly. Julian gestured toward the private study. "He's inside. I told him it's his decision. He's nervous." Richard nodded once, more like a man approaching a business deal than a child, but there was something else beneath it too. Hesitation. Maybe even fear. Julian stayed outside the room as the two met. Through the partially open door, he watched Eli perched on the edge of the leather armchair, his small hands clasped in his lap, eyes alert but not hostile. Richard sat across from him, awkward at first, as though unsure how to calibrate his tone. "I'm not here to confuse you, Eli. Or to take you away. I just wanted to see you. To know you." Eli said nothing. Richard cleared his throat. "I didn't know about you. If I had, things might have been different." "How?" Eli asked. Richard faltered. "I don't know. I was younger. Selfish. Focused on things that didn't matter as much as I thought they did." There was a long pause. "Do you want me to come with you?" Eli finally asked, not with fear, but with curiosity. Richard blinked. Only if you want to. Do you want me? The boy pressed. I think I want the chance to try, Richard said. But I also know I've missed a lot. Eli nodded slowly. He looked down at his shoes, then at the floor, then back at the man in front of him. I think I already have someone who tried. And with that, the conversation shifted. Richard stayed another 15 minutes, answering a few questions, offering a letter, sealed, written the night he discovered the truth. Julian didn't read it. That was Eli's decision. When Richard left, he didn't make a plea. He didn't argue. He simply placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. Take care of him, he said. I already am, Julian replied. That night, Eli sat on the edge of the couch, envelope in hand. Do you want to read it? Julian asked gently. Eli shook his head. Not yet. Maybe one day. They sat together for a long while, no television, no distractions. Just the quiet, and the slow ticking of a clock that no longer seemed to rush them toward anything. Does this change anything? Eli asked eventually. Julian turned to him. What do you mean? You know, now that you know I have a dad. Julian exhaled. You'll always have people connected to you by blood. That won't change. But love isn't about DNA. Love is about choice. Every day, I choose to care about you. I choose to protect you. I choose to stay. Eli stared at him for a moment that felt eternal. Then I choose you too, he said. The next morning, Julian began the process of legal adoption. It wasn't simple. Papers. Legal hurdles. Statements. But none of it felt hard, not compared to the weight of unspoken promises they had already lived. The law was merely catching up to what had already rooted itself in both of them. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. Julian found himself changing in subtle ways. He no longer worked until midnight. He no longer saw his penthouse as a fortress. There were science kits in the kitchen now. Soccer cleats near the door. The living room was full of planets hung from the ceiling on fishing line, a homemade solar system Eli had built one weekend while Julian helped cut cardboard rings and glue tiny paper moons in orbit. There was laughter too. Not the kind you fake at cocktail parties, but real, belly-deep laughter that made Julian feel like a boy again himself. There were late-night talks, random questions about love and fear and the nature of black holes, and one night when Eli fell asleep on Julian's chest, arms curled in tight like he was still afraid this might all disappear. It wouldn't. Not anymore. One afternoon, Julian took Eli to Kensington Gardens. They brought a telescope and waited for dusk to fall. The stars came out slowly, as if shy to reveal themselves. Julian helped Eli adjust the focus, guiding his small fingers on the dials. Do you think Mom can see us from up there? Eli asked. Julian swallowed. I think if love leaves a mark on the universe, then yes. She can see. She's in all of it now. Eli nodded. Then, after a pause, I think she'd like the name of our ship. Julian smiled. The Isabelle. Yeah. I think she would. Months passed. Life steadied. Eli started school and came home every day with stories, some exciting, some painful, all new. Julian learned how to pack lunches, how to navigate teacher conferences, how to comfort a child having a hard day. And then one morning, it happened. Julian was standing in the foyer, coffee in hand, as Eli slung his backpack over his shoulder. The boy turned at the door, hesitation in his step. See you after school, Dad, he said, like it had always been that way. Julian didn't say anything for a moment. He couldn't. Then he nodded. I'll be here. In that instant, everything he had feared, every doubt, every ghost of failure, fell quiet. This wasn't a bond formed in blood. It was stronger than that. It had been chosen. built, earned. And no matter what the world tried to take from them, no matter what names lived on documents or what DNA said, Julian knew one thing with unshakable certainty. He was Eli's father. And Eli was home. Julian Blackwood had built a fortress, one made not of bricks and mortar, but of numbers, contracts, deadlines, and deals. He wasn't born into wealth. He earned it. Through intellect, discipline, and relentless ambition, he rose from obscurity to become one of the world's most influential tech CEOs. His name was synonymous with precision. His empire? Unshakable. At least that's what the world believed. But beneath the suits and press releases was a man who had locked something far more precious behind the walls he built, his own heart. And yet, all of that control began to unravel on a cold autumn morning in Highgate Cemetery. Julian had gone there alone, as he did every year, to visit the grave of his late wife, Isabelle. She had been gone for 5 years, and not a day passed that he didn't feel the silence she left behind. But that morning was different. That morning, there was a boy. A boy sitting at Isabelle's grave. A boy who claimed she was his mother. Eli. In a matter of seconds, Julian's meticulously organized reality was shattered. What began as confusion quickly spiraled into disbelief, then a slow, suffocating grief for a version of Isabelle he had never known, one who had carried a secret, one who had loved and lost long before he realized how much she had hidden. Julian could have turned away. He had every reason to protect his carefully curated world. But something in Eli's eyes, a mirror of Isabelle's, held him in place. That glance, that vulnerability, opened a door in Julian's soul he hadn't touched since the day he buried his wife. It was the beginning of a bond neither of them saw coming. As the truth unraveled, Julian discovered that Isabelle had indeed given birth to Eli before their marriage, at a time when her life had been complicated by fear, trauma, and heartbreak. Her journal, found at the shelter where Eli had spent his early years, revealed her inner world, one filled with guilt, hope, and maternal devotion. She had planned to tell Julian. She wanted to raise Eli. But tragedy arrived too soon, and the secret died with her. What Julian hadn't expected was what followed, that he would grow to love the boy not as a duty, not as a connection to Isabelle, but simply for who he was. Eli was thoughtful. Quiet. Brilliant in small, surprising ways. He asked questions about the stars, about emotions, about whether memories could be like planets, distant but real. Slowly, Julian let down the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. He let Eli in. But the world rarely lets peace settle for long. The DNA test confirmed what Julian feared: Eli was not his biological son. The name listed as the father, Richard Crane, was a storm waiting to happen. A man Julian knew too well. Powerful, cold, strategic. The kind of man who viewed people as resources. The kind of man who might see Eli as leverage, not legacy. When Richard learned the truth, the battle lines were drawn, but not in the way either man expected. Julian didn't fight for ownership. He fought for choice. Eli's choice. He refused to treat the boy like an asset. He stood firm in what mattered, that Eli had a right to decide who belonged in his life. That biology didn't create family, love did. In the end, Richard surprised them both. He didn't demand. He listened. He met Eli. He spoke from a place of reflection, maybe even regret. But it wasn't enough to rewrite the past. Eli, with the wisdom of someone who had seen too much and hoped anyway, chose the person who had been there for him not because of obligation, but because of presence. Julian. From that moment, their bond became unshakable. Julian adopted Eli legally, but the truth was, the papers only confirmed what had already taken root between them. Eli was no longer a child abandoned. He was home. Their days changed. Mornings were filled with laughter, with cereal spilled on counters, with questions about gravity and light. Nights were quiet but full, books shared under blankets, stargazing from the penthouse windows, memories made in moments Julian used to ignore. The man who once measured his worth by stock value now found fulfillment in a drawing on the fridge. In a birthday wish whispered under a pillow. In the small but profound sentence spoken one morning at the door. "See you after school, Dad." Julian never imagined himself as a father. Not like this. Not without warning or preparation. But what he discovered was that love is never logical. It does not arrive with instruction. It is not earned through merit. It simply asks one question: are you willing? He was. That was all it took. Eli, too, had changed. No longer the boy who sat in the cold beside a grave, clinging to the memory of a mother lost, he became someone who knew what it meant to be chosen. Not rescued. Not pitied. Chosen. His fears didn't vanish overnight, but now he had someone who didn't flinch when they showed up. Someone who stayed. As for Isabelle, she lived on, not just in memory, but in the space between them. In the journal Eli still read before bed. In the name of the cardboard spaceship they built together. In the echo of her love that neither time nor tragedy could erase. Their story didn't begin in joy. It began in loss. But it did not end there. It found something rare in a world quick to categorize and quicker to judge. It found the truth that family is not defined by blood, but by the courage to love without condition. And that love, imperfect, untidy, beautiful, was the legacy they chose to carry forward. So, what can we learn from Julian and Eli? We learn that sometimes, the people who change your life forever arrive not in grand entrances, but in quiet moments. In an unexpected knock. In a name you didn't expect. In a truth you never asked for. We learn that love is not always instant. It is built, slowly, silently, through presence and patience. Through nights of uncertainty. Through unspoken forgiveness. We learn that showing up matters more than knowing what to do. That the act of choosing to stay, again and again, becomes its own kind of miracle. And perhaps most importantly, we learn that you don't have to be perfect to be a parent, a partner, or a protector. You just have to be willing to grow. Willing to care. Willing to open a door and say, "You're not alone." In a world that's more divided, distracted, and digital than ever, Julian and Eli's story reminds us that human connection, authentic, vulnerable, and chosen, is still the most powerful thing we can offer one another. Maybe you're like Julian, caught in a life so full it's become hollow. Or maybe you're like Eli, carrying a quiet ache, wondering if anyone will ever truly see you. Or maybe, just maybe, you're somewhere in between, searching for a reason to believe that love still matters. Let this story be your reason. Let it be your proof that healing is possible, even after devastation. That family can be found in the most unlikely places. That the heart, no matter how long it's been closed, can always be reopened. And if this story moved you, if it stirred something in you or made you reflect on the people who have loved you through your mess, or the people you've been brave enough to love in return, then don't let it end here. We're building something bigger than just stories. We're building a space for meaning. For emotion. For rediscovery of what really matters. So, if you believe in second chances. If you believe in love that chooses you when the world doesn't. If you believe that stories like this can change the way we see ourselves and each other. Then please, subscribe to this channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep creating stories that matter, stories that inspire, that heal, that help us feel a little less alone in the world. Because everyone deserves to feel seen. Everyone deserves to feel chosen. And the next story might be the one that changes someone's life. Maybe even yours. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for believing in stories that remind us what it means to be human.